Okay, freshmen, good morning. Today is May 19th, Tuesday. Believe it or not, we only have 4 more weeks of school, uh, counting finals week. So it's really 3 more weeks of instruction and then finals week. You guys should be getting some updates about finals early this week. I know teachers had some meetings Friday and things are being finalized right around now. Um, as far as our class goes, we're going to continue with content this week, Tuesday and Thursday. And then the following week, we will have, I think, just 1 day of content, and then that'll lead us into a quiz. So we can expect to have a quiz a week from Thursday. So Thursday's the 21st. So I think we'll have a quiz around May 28th on everything we've learned about evolution up till now. Weather was not great the last couple days, but looks like it's going to get warmer this weekend. So hopefully we're able to spend, get outside and get outside of our houses. And I know that always makes me feel better. But anyways, for today's class, if you are looking at my PowerPoint, I talked to a few students during the meeting on Thursday and wanted to find a video that does a good job of going through Darwin's 4-step process of variation, heredity, overproduction of offspring, and then reproductive success. And so this 5-minute video I think is pretty worthwhile. So before you start the notes today, I would pause the video, and if you just Google Evolution 101, the video that comes up is 5 minutes and 2 seconds. It's from ANOVA. I'll also put the link underneath the Edmodo post, but before you start learning about the new stuff, I would go back and watch a 5-minute video. It kind of helps to summarize what I lectured last Tuesday. After you do that, the next slide, I'll have some notes on evolution for evidence of evolution, and then we're going to continue our packet, pages 8 and 9, which is all about evidence of evolution. So go ahead and pause this video and Google Evolution 101. After you watch that 5-minute video, come on back here and get started with notes. Okay, so in terms of evolution being a cornerstone of biology, as you guys know, it is, sometimes a controversial piece. It can, people who believe in creationism may think that evolution goes against the Bible. I don't think that's true. I think that creationism and what it says in the Bible is a set of beliefs, whereas evolution is based on facts and evidence, and the belief part of your mind and the part of your mind that deals with facts and evidence, they're two separate components. And so you can believe in evolution and believe the Bible. It's two different ways of knowing about life. And so anyways, I want to make sure that we do understand that there is hard evidence out there supporting the theory of evolution. Evolution is accepted as fact by biologists and scientists all over the world. So anyways, we're going to go through this 5-piece list. The number one, strongest piece of evidence for evolution. Guess it. You might be able to come up with it. It is fossils. The fact that if you dig into the earth, you find older species, things that have gone extinct recently, and then you dig further down, and it's things that have gone extinct a really long time ago. And you dig even further down, and it's stuff that went extinct a really long time ago. And so the fact that there's all these bones of extinct organisms that look similar to extant organisms or things that are currently living gives pretty good proof of that things have changed over time. So fossils are any remains of an organism preserved in rock, or any evidence of an organism preserved in rock. So we pretty much think of bones as being fossils, like when a paleontologist is looking for dinosaur fossils, they're looking for bones. But a footprint could also be a fossil. A leaf that is embedded into a dried up riverbank and preserved for a million years, that's also considered a fossil. It does not always have to be bones. But anyways, the fossil record as it pertains to evolution is the specific order that fossils appear within geologic layers. The Earth is basically built up over years on top of itself, and so what happens is when things die and get buried, and things need to be pretty lucky to end up fossilized, but they end up in specific layers of the Earth, and then we can figure out how old these things are. If you just dig into the Earth, you can visualize evolution by looking at old fossils, newer fossils, and then current organisms. I'll give you guys a couple examples in a bit. And Darwin predicted that we would find missing links that group together similar organisms, such as reptiles and birds, or fish and amphibians, or humans and chimpanzees. And Darwin made this prediction back in the 1800s, and since then we've discovered a lot of fossils that have pretty much supported what he thought we would find. So here's the great example of the missing link between ancient reptiles or dinosaurs and modern day birds, and that's Archaeopteryx. It was a fossil found in China I want to say it was discovered in the 1960s, but anyways, it dates back a few million years to a dinosaur bird-like creature, which basically proves that birds did evolve from dinosaurs. And actually, if you didn't know that birds evolved from dinosaurs, it's pretty interesting. You can look up videos of Tyrannosaurus Rex walking and chicken walking, and you notice a chicken and a T-Rex, they look really, really similar. I know it seems kind of crazy, but if you just focus on like the shape of the body and the way that they move, the way they lean forward, it's really, really similar. It makes sense that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Another example, amber preserved fossils. So an organism gets stuck in tree resin, then over time that solidifies into a mineral, and so entire species, such as insects, can be preserved in amber. I don't know if you guys know Jurassic Park, but that was the main premise of Jurassic Park: a mosquito stuck in amber that had some dinosaur DNA from blood that it just drank. Here's the missing link between humans and chimpanzees. Australopithecus afarensis, more commonly known as Lucy, the scientists that discovered her, were digging in Ethiopia, and they were listening to a Beatles song called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and that's where it came the name. But if you look at Lucy, we notice that she has some ape-like characteristics, but also some human-like characteristics. And so this supports the idea that humans branched away from similar great apes. We did not evolve from chimpanzees. That's a misconception. We evolved from a common ancestor with chimpanzees. So it's not that chimpanzees evolved into humans. It's that a species similar to Australopithecus branched into humans and chimpanzees. 99%, 99.9999% of things that die never become fossilized. Things need to get really lucky to turn into a fossil. They need to die at the perfect place and time to get trapped and solidified. If you guys know anything about ecology, you know that when things die in the forest, they pretty much decompose into soil. And so there's a lot of gaps in the fossil record, and that's due to the fact that only about 1 in a million things that die become fossils. 999,999 things out of 1,000 don't become fossils. They decompose into soil. Things without bones, worms, algae, bacteria, a lot of those things don't even have the ability to fossilize because they don't have anything that can really, get hardened over time. Okay, so number one, fossil record. That's, I'd say, the biggest piece of information supporting the idea of evolution. Number two, biogeography. Geography means place on Earth, and bio means life. So biogeography is the idea that species that are geographically close to each other are more genetically related because they likely evolved from a common ancestor, or they evolved more recently from each other. A great example of this is Darwin's finches, 14 species of finch that came from probably one group of finches that blew over in a storm from South America. And then as they ended up on all these different islands, they ended up basically specializing based on the fact that they're all a little bit different. Those that had the traits that were better suited for survival were more likely to get food, stay away from predators, meaning they're more likely to pass on their traits to their offspring. So it makes sense that similar looking species and species that are similar genetically are more close to each other geographically. A great example is marsupials. You see 7, 8 examples of marsupials. What do these things all have in common? They all are from Australia. Is it just chance that all these mammals from Australia are marsupials, meaning they have a pouch like the kangaroo and their baby grows in a pouch? No, it's not by chance. It's not coincidence. It likely evolved one time in Australia. It was a successful trait, and then that one species branched and speciated into all the different marsupials that live in Australia today. Number 3, anatomy. Homologous structures is a subset of anatomy. Homo means same, and so what this means is a homologous structure are similar structures that serve entirely different functions. And this shows divergent evolution. So an example here, we look at all of these forelimbs of mammals, human, cat, bat, porpoise, and horse. They all have pretty much the same bones because they speciated from a like source. But clearly these limbs do different functions. Cats run and bats fly and porpoises swim. But the fact that they're all based on the same bones shows a divergence. One species to diverge means to split. So one species diverged into different species. So homologous structures is proof of divergent evolution. Now the opposite end of this, analogous structures, is when structures of different organisms have a similar function but different structures. And this shows convergent evolution. So convergent evolution are two things that are totally different, converge together. This doesn't show common ancestry. What this shows is that similar environmental pressures result in similar outcomes due to natural selection. So the best example of this is the evolution of flight. Bats fly and birds fly and insects fly, but if you look, sorry, I know my face is blocking the drawing a little bit, but if you look at the structures, a bat wing, a bird wing, and an insect wing are totally different. They're made totally differently. They did not evolve from one another, but if you can fly, is that going to make you more or less likely to reproduce? It's going to make you more likely to reproduce, because if you can fly, you're more likely to not get caught by a predator. You're more likely to be able to escape a forest fire or a flood. You're more likely to fly and find new food. So the evolution of flight leads to survival. So it makes sense that the evolution of flight has happened multiple times throughout the history of living organisms, because being able to fly is a good thing. If I don't know, if some cat had a mutation and that cat could fly and run and climb trees, that cat would be much more likely to survive out in the wild because it just has more traits to keep it around. So again, analogous structures showing the opposite of homologous structures. Same function, different anatomy, whereas a homologous structure is the same anatomy but very different function. And both homologous and analogous structures prove two different things about evolution. If you need to stop and go back, this part, it gets even tricky to me. I mix up the terms once in a while. But as far as the quiz coming up in a week, I would, just go back with these two terms. I think it's kind of easy to get them a little bit mixed up. Another example of anatomy is the evolution of anatomy, which is derived traits, traits that have recently evolved within a species. Ancestral traits, these are traits that are left over from a previous species, so older traits. Here's an example. Birds evolved the ability to fly. This is a derived trait because birds came from dinosaurs that couldn't fly. But birds lay eggs with thick shells, and birds didn't evolve that on their own. They got that from dinosaurs. So that is considered a ancestral trait. Then the last one is a vestigial trait. A vestigial trait is a ancestral trait, meaning it's old, but it's a trait that's no longer useful. And so basically something that's old and useless. So again, even think about humans. A derived trait, something that's new for humans, is our huge brains. We have pretty much the biggest brain of any primate, and that is something that we evolved, and that was a big advantage for us. An ancestral trait is our opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs are great for holding tools and utensils and building things, but humans aren't the first species to evolve opposable thumbs. Australopithecus had an opposable thumb. Neanderthals had opposable thumbs. That trait has been around for a while. And then as far as the vestigial trait, a great example would be our wisdom teeth. Our wisdom teeth are something that we no longer need, but they're still there. They evolved millions of years ago, and there's really no pressure for them to go away. They don't cause any major problems. So it makes sense that that some of our traits that are left over aren't really useful anymore. I have a couple more examples of those. This is a blind mole rat, and you notice they still have eye sockets even though they don't have eyes. And it makes sense that, just because the species evolved to no longer need eyes, they live underground, they don't use sight. You can't just change the anatomy, and so they still have like the orbital bones where the eyes used to go. This is the whale skeleton, and you notice there's legs here. The legs are just kind of floating in the whale blubber. Whales obviously don't use legs anymore, but they evolved from species that did use legs. Whales evolved from land animals, like similar to a dog, about 100 million years ago. And those leg bones are no longer useful, but they don't just go away unless there's a pressure to make them go away. And because there is no pressure to go away, whales are always going to have these extra leg bones that are there, but they don't really do anything. So these are examples of vestigial traits. Can you guys think of any more vestigial traits in humans? I can think of like 2 or 3 more. So you can pause the video and see if you can think of any parts of our body that no longer really do anything for us. Tailbones. We come from primates that had tails. Those tails were used for balance when we were climbing in trees, but we don't really use tails anymore. We don't have a tail, but we still have a bone from where we used to have a tail, and it hurts when we fall on it. Goosebumps. When we get cold, our skin, our hair sticks up and we get goosebumps. When we were covered in hair millions of years ago and our hair sticks up, that would insulate us and keep us warm. We still have the trait of sticking our hair up when we're cold, but since we don't have much hair anymore, it doesn't really keep us warm. So here's 2 more examples of vestigial traits. The appendix is another one that, as far as we can tell, there's really no good use for the appendix, yet we still have that trait. Lastly, for anatomy, embryological development. Development is similar for many different organisms, suggesting a common ancestor. So if you look at the growth of a rabbit, a human, a cow, a pig, a chicken, a tortoise, salamander, and fish, when those things are new, this top row shows them like a few weeks into development, they all pretty much look the same. They have gills and they have this tail, and and this basically shows that we evolved from a common ancestor, yet as the embryo develops, it becomes more and more different, more specialized from one another. As far as turtles and chickens, if you look at this embryo, you can kind of tell that they're pretty closely related because a chicken and a tortoise look pretty similar. Number 4, molecular biology. The fact that most genes, most genetic information is shared amongst all living organisms. This shows that more closely related organisms are going to share more genes. So you have a couple species of butterflies. We see that these two species of butterflies show 99.3% the same genes. We know that they're really, really closely related. This species of butterfly shares 99.1% or 99.2 if you round of the same genes as this one. So they're a little bit less closely related. But again, the fact that any butterfly is going to show very, very similar DNA from other butterflies suggests that they are closely related. Um, Going back a couple units, we know that the genetic code is universal for all living things. DNA codes for RNA, RNA codes for proteins. Most genes are conserved throughout evolutionary history. So, even just think of all those embryos that I showed you pictures of, a pig, a chicken, a turtle, a human. We all have lungs and a heart and a brain and some sort of bone structure and some sort of, we have eyes, we have hearing. And so, like, it's crazy to think about, but humans and turtles, we're pretty much the same. Like a lot of the way we're put together, a lot of our anatomy is very similar. So we're gonna have at least 75, 80% of our DNA exactly the same. It's actually gonna be less. It's only gonna be a few differences that make us different from something like a turtle. This should be pretty obvious, but the more genetic differences between two species, the longer ago they split, the longer ago they speciated. So you look at something like hemoglobin amino acid sequence. So you have the, going back to our DNA unit, you have all the different amino acids that are produced in hemoglobin for different species. And we see like a human and a chimpanzee, we actually make the exact same amino acid. That's how close we are genetically. That when it comes to making hemoglobin, we build it with the exact same code. Now, if you look at a horse and a human, we see there's some differences. We see there's a lot of similarities, but there are some small differences. Like right here, amino acid number 111, we use valine and horses use alanine. We use cysteine, they use leucine for number 112. So again, us and horses were pretty similar, but there's more genetic differences to make hemoglobin than, say, a human and a chimp, where it's pretty much identical. Last but not least, experiments. Scientists are constantly performing experiments to test and support the idea of evolution. I'm going to share with you my favorite experiment proving evolution, known as the peppered moth experiment. If you look at this picture, you should be able to see that there are two moths on this tree. So go ahead, look closely. Hopefully you can see that there is a moth right here. But obviously that moth blends in. So before the year 1850, this is what trees looked like in England. Which moth is clearly going to have a better chance to survive and pass on its genes? This one. Because this moth is going to get seen by a bird, it's going to get eaten, it's going to be less likely to survive and therefore less likely to pass on its genetics to have a dark moth offspring. The light moth is much more likely to survive and pass on its genetics. However, what happened around the year 1900? The Industrial Revolution. What did we burn? We still do it today, unfortunately, but what did we burn to power the Industrial Revolution? Coal. And when you burn coal, soot gets everywhere. So now this is what trees look like 50 years later in England. Now, it's really good to be a dark moth, because if you're a dark moth, you blend in. If you're a light moth, you're going to get seen by a bird, you're going to get eaten, you're going to be less likely to survive and pass on your genetics. While I'm thinking of it, guys, off track, but a lot of people say evolution is about the survival of the fittest. That's not it at all. It's about survival and reproduction, because without reproduction, your survival really doesn't have any evolutionary worth. You could be the best. So let's look at this dark moth right here. if this dark moth is the most camouflaged moth in the world, and it's the fastest moth in the world, and it can find the best flowers to eat, but it never finds a mate and it never reproduces, it really has no evolutionary fitness. Remember that word from last week. So it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival and reproduction of the fittest. That's what's key. Without reproduction, evolutionarily, you're not really moving forward. But anyways, take a look at these bar graphs. In a span of 50 years, we saw speciation of the peppered moth, where it used to be that there was variation, but most of the moths were light. We now see that there's variation, but most of the moths are dark. Again, do environments stay the same? No, environments change all the time, naturally, and because of humans, in this case, because of humans. And so we see in a span of 50 years a change in the genetic and phenotypic makeup of the peppered moth. To wrap this all up, why do scientists accept the theory of evolution? Well, number one, fossil record. Number two, biogeography. Number three, anatomy. Remember, there was a lot within that anatomy section. Homologous traits, analogous traits, vestigial traits, ancestral traits, derived traits. Lots to remember there. Molecular biology, I'm just looking at DNA and RNA similarities and differences of species, and then last but not least, experimentation, such as the peppered moth. Many new sources of information could have shown evolution to be false, but no evidence against the idea of evolution has ever been discovered. Scientists are constantly looking for ways to disprove evolution. That's what scientists do. They find something, they discover something, then they try to disprove it. They try to find flaws in it, but the theory of evolution has never been disproved. I would be shocked if it ever is. Obviously, again, scientists are always trying to find new and better information to solidify ideas, but Darwin discovered this 160 years ago, and there really hasn't ever been good evidence to show that evolution is not accurate. Okay, that's it for today's notes. Your homework for tonight, evolution packet 8 and 9, page 8 and 9. I think it's pretty straightforward from the notes. That is it. I hope today's weather is a little bit nicer than it has been. Hope you get outside. Remember, guys, we're coming down to the wire now. 3 more weeks and then finals. So now's the time. If you're getting behind in any classes, including my class, communicate with those teachers, send an email. Make sure you have a plan to be successful. You definitely don't want a incomplete. I talked about this last week, but you know, if students are not engaging at all, they can get an incomplete, and that'll carry over to the fall, and you'll have to make up that work next fall, which does not sound fun. So staying on top of things. Just keep working on the evolution packet. We'll get it turned in when we wrap up next week. That's it for today. All right, have a good one. Okay, freshmen, good morning. Today is Thursday, May 21st. Did you guys see the news on Wednesday, May 20th? That was crazy. I couldn't believe the news that came out yesterday. But anyways, I hope you're having a good week. Again, today is Thursday, the 21st. Remember that every Thursday we have live check-ins on Skype at 3 p.m. So if you have questions about this week's notes or assignments, or you just want to check in, you can do that at 3 p.m. today. Anyways, we're just going to take a few notes today on the mechanisms of evolution. Remember, last class was evidence of evolution. And then you're going to continue the evolution packet, page 10 and 11. That is a web quest all about the mechanisms of evolution. So go ahead and get out your notes, and we will get started. All right, 5 mechanisms of evolution. The first one we've already learned about, natural selection. So I don't think, let's write it down, but you don't need to redefine it. It's when the environment selects for a certain trait, allele, changing allele frequency over time. Number 2, genetic drift. This is what I talked about last week when I said, sometimes luck plays a role. This is change in allele frequency due to chance. So no actual selection is taking place. A change is taking place, but it's not due to natural selection, like being the best trait. This is due to chance, being at the right place at the right time. A subset of genetic drift, so we'll call this 2A, is the bottleneck effect. The bottleneck effect is when a random event, usually a natural disaster, not always, but usually a natural disaster, drastically reduces population size, and that leaves a small random set of alleles in the population, and that small population could repopulate and regrow, but you're losing a lot of diversity, and so you're creating a different subset. My example, everyone who was outside at 1 p.m. died in a tornado. It would only be the students who were left inside who were left to repopulate. It has nothing to do with the students who were inside were more fit. They were just lucky they weren't outside when the tornado hit. Cheetahs are actually kind of a cool example of the bottleneck effect. Cheetahs are fairly inbred, and scientists figured out that about 60,000 years ago there was a ice age that killed almost all the cheetahs. But luckily, the cheetahs did not go extinct. They recovered, but since their population went so far down and it almost hit zero before it swooped back up and recovered, cheetahs are all fairly genetically similar to each other, and so there's really not a whole lot of diversity in cheetahs because of that bottleneck effect. So because of that, part of the reason cheetahs are fairly endangered now is because they're inbred. They have a lot of genetic diseases because they're so similar to each other. Number 3 is gene flow. Gene flow is when fertile individuals or gametes migrate to another population. So with flow, you should think of movement. With movement, you should think of migration. So I would jot down under this, gene flow is basically migration. And again, pollen is an example how a tree doesn't have to migrate, but tree pollen, which is the same as tree sperm, can migrate hundreds of miles based on weather, and that can actually create gene flow. If a oak tree subspecies that only lives in Macomb County drops some pollen and that pollen floats all the way to Ohio, that could really create some genetic changes based on that migration. Regardless, gene flow is going to reduce genetic differences between populations. And human race is likely due to gene flow. As an early species, we were fairly isolated, and so people living in really specific areas ended up kind of looking different, and that's why today someone who is historically from Asia or Africa or Europe are going to look different from each other. Fast forward 1,000 years, and race is probably going to be something that's pretty outdated, where people are going to be, you know, for lack of a better term, blended together because there's going to be so much more intermingling of those genetics. Number 4, mutation, something we learned about back in the DNA unit. A random change during transcription or translation that results in a new allele. Remember that most mutations are bad or neutral, and that's not going to lead to evolution, but every once in a while there is a mutation that leads to survival or better chance of reproduction. Some famous mutations with humans: blue eyes, red hair, and lactose tolerance. These are all mutations that really obviously weren't bad things. They led to either the same or more survival. And so those things ended up evolving in certain groups of humans. Last but not least, sexual selection. So this is natural selection, but not about surviving. It's natural selection, but based on who has what it takes to get a mate of the opposite sex to reproduce with. This is when mates are chosen, not randomly selected, but chosen based on certain traits. For example, this is a peahen, female peacock. This is a peacock, a male. This peahen is going to choose based on this courtship display. And so peacocks, the males, they don't get to mate randomly. They get to mate if they have the right feathers, if they're doing the right dance, if they're doing what it takes to impress the female. A little more on sexual selection. They can be sexual selection can be because of combat, like two caribou fighting each other, a ritual display such as mating dances and birds. When a trait is sexually selected, it often indicates fitness to the mate. So if you think about it, the caribou that knocks down or injures the other caribou is clearly stronger and a better fighter. So the female sees that as, well, that male obviously has good genetics because he's strong, he's healthy. So those are the genetics I want for my offspring. Same with this peacock. If this peacock has these big, beautiful tail feathers, well, that means that he must be good at finding food, because if you were starving, you wouldn't be able to grow these big, beautiful tail feathers. It means that he has good proteins to create these different colors. So the peahen thinks those are good genetics. Those are the genetics I want to pass on to my offspring. Humans, this may seem weird, but humans do the exact same thing. When you are looking at a person of the opposite sex, someone who you like, you're thinking, I think that person's cute, but the evolutionary biology portion of your brain is thinking those genes are the genes that I want for my children. And so when you find someone of the opposite sex that you find attractive, it's this evolutionary biology kicking in of those are the genetics I want for my children. And so it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. We can go on and on with that, but it's probably a better discussion. It seems a little awkward for me to be talking about it to myself. Anyways, one more example. Birds of Paradise. This is one of the coolest videos. If you just go to Google and type in Bird of Paradise video, um, it it's this group of birds that live on Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is an island in Oceania that has no predators. And so because there's no predators, these birds did not evolve at all due to natural selection, because they're called birds of paradise. They live in paradise. They live in a place where there's a lot of food, there's no predators. So all that selection pressure that's normally saved for natural selection got shifted into sexual selection. And so it's some of the wildest sexual selection you'll ever see. It's colors and feathers and dances that have not evolved anywhere else, because in most places there's predators to worry about. So sexual selection can only go so far, but in Papua New Guinea, sexual selection basically ran out of control, and so it's you end up with really interesting results. So pause the video if you need a little break. Go to Google, type in birds of paradise, and yeah, there's some really cool stuff in there. Okay, a couple examples, then that's it for notes. So you don't need to write anything down, but you should be able to guess, of the 5 mechanisms of evolution, which one are we talking about? I'm going to use squirrels. Squirrels come in all shapes and colors. So you have black squirrel, red squirrel, gray squirrel, brown squirrel. An earthquake hits Macomb and all the gray squirrels are killed. Now the population looks like this. What mechanism of evolution is that? Bottleneck effect, genetic drift. Remember, the gray squirrels were not less fit, they were just unlucky. So that's a change in allele population due to chance. A black squirrel and red tree squirrel mate, and there's a mistake during meiosis or during the copying of DNA, and the new individual has a new gene, a new allele. So if you look at the new population, there's an allele, an albino squirrel that we have not seen before. What type of evolution would this be? That one should be obvious. Mutation. And remember, that white squirrel, it's probably going to stick out. It's probably going to get eaten by something, because being a white squirrel when you live in a green and brown tree, that's probably not good. But what if that mutation took place in northern Canada? being a white squirrel in northern Canada where it's snowy all the time, that might be beneficial, and that could lead to evolution. Whereas a mutation of being white in Macomb County, probably not going to lead to success. Probably means you're going to get seen by a hawk or a eagle or something, and you'll get eaten more easily. The black squirrels emigrate from Macomb. That means they leave. The brown squirrels immigrate to Macomb. That means they come in. So our population has no more black squirrels, but it has more brown squirrels. What is that an example of? Gene flow, also known as migration. Remember, genetic drift and gene flow, they sound similar, but you need to think of flow as movement, movement as migration, drift. When a boat like drifts somewhere randomly, you need to think of drift as random or as chance or as luck. So those are easy to mix up, gene flow, genetic drift. All right. Last couple are easy. Black squirrels can stay hidden inside of trees and in dark places, meaning they have the best chance to survive and reproduce. So that would obviously be natural selection. The black squirrels are better at surviving, therefore they're more likely to pass on their genes. Last but not least, females pick mates based off their fur color, and they prefer red the best. Now the population looks like this. Well, if the red squirrels are more attractive to the opposite sex, that would be an example of sexual selection. This is an example of a hummingbird called the booted racket tail. The males have this big long tail, and the females pick males based on who has the best tail, because that male in the middle with the long tail, it means he's healthy, he's eating a lot of food, he has good genetics, he's staying safe, and so he's more likely to pass on those genes. Okay. Hopefully those 5 mechanisms of evolution was pretty straightforward, nothing too confusing there. Your homework is the next 2 pages of the packet, page 10 and 11. It's a web quest where you go through microevolution, the small changes of mechanisms of evolution. And our packet should pretty much be done. I think we have 1 more page that we're going to finish on Tuesday of next week. And then we'll be ready for the quiz on Thursday. So the quiz will be 1 week from today. Remember, 3 p.m. optional check-in. Just to, if you're confused, if you have questions, if you just want to stop in and say hello. I know last week was like 15 or 20 minutes, but I think, for students that did come by, it might have been helpful. But anyways, that is it for today. I'll see some of you at 3 o'clock today. Otherwise, I will see you guys on Tuesday. So have a great weekend and stay safe. Bye.